What's going on, guys? I'm Jeff Carpenter with Ready Light Media, and in this video I'm going to show you how I retouched this image of my friend and neighbor Zach. Last week I did a video kind of explaining the process of how I got the shot on location, and as promised I'm going to go through kind of my retouching process for this image. We're going to do frequency separation, so I'm going to run through that whole thing. Editing guys is a little bit different than editing for girls, but we're going to run through the whole process and just kind of show you the start to finish of how I retouch this image. So let's go ahead and jump on into Photoshop. I've already got this image pulled up into Photoshop. As you can see, I've got just a background layer. So we're going to go ahead and build the frequency separation. I've got a Photoshop action that I'll have available to download for you for free. But we're just going to go ahead and build the process so you can kind of see how that works. And then I'll put the link to where you can download it for free, the action, in the description of the video. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the background layer twice. On the first one, so where it says background copy, we're just going to call this low. So we're going to have a low layer and we're going to have a high layer. We're going to deselect the high layer so we just have the low layer visible. And we're going to go up to filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. As you can see, I've got a key command already. If you don't have a key command for your Gaussian blur, this is a really handy to have. So I made a key command. You can make it whatever you want, but I recommend that. So we're going to push Gaussian blur. What I want to do is I want to go all the way down to where it says a radius of 0.1. And we're going to go ahead and select some areas of skin here. We're going to zoom in. What I want to do is I want to bring this radius up until I start to lose skin tone or lose texture in the skin. So we're going to just bring it up slowly, bring it up slowly. You have to let go of it though in order to actually get it to populate in preview. So we'll go up, we'll say about 5.5 is a good place to start. This is going to differ based on the resolution of your camera, based on how close in cropped you are to the image. So there's a lot of things that will factor into what the radius is. But really the rule of thumb for this is just make sure you slide the Gaussian blur up until you start to lose that skin texture. So for me right now, in this case, I'm shooting on a Micro Four Thirds camera, smaller sensor, not as many megapixels maybe, and I cropped it in from the original shot. So 5.5 is a good radius for me. That will definitely differ based on the camera you're shooting with and the actual image you're editing. So don't just copy what I did right there. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and turn on the high layer again. As you can see, we've got a blurry layer, we've got a high layer now that I've not done anything to, so nothing's happened to it. So it just looks like the normal background layer. All right, now we have the high layer selected, and what we're going to do is we're going to go up to image, and we're going to go apply image. And right now mine looks like it's kind of gray. You can see some of the features on this, but yours might not look like this. So I'm going to show you what exactly you need to have selected in order to make it look like this. So you want your source image just to be your main image you opened up, whatever that file is. On the layer, we want to sample from the low layer. You might be defaulted to merge, which will just make it look like a blank gray slate there. To definitely make sure the layer is the low layer. The blending mode is subtract. So right here where it says blending mode, we want it to be subtract. And the scale is 2 and the offset is 128. That's just kind of an arbitrary number, those two numbers, but definitely make sure your scale is 2, your offset is 128. And you want it to look like this where it's gray, but you're starting to have that kind of that texture back into it. Once I click OK, it'll still look like that. But now we're going to go into the blending mode over here on the right side and turn this to linear light. All right, so now what this does, with these two layers combined, it looks just like if I toggle on and off this background layer, it's exactly the same. It's basically these two layers combined create the background layer. So now that we've got our layers created for our frequency separation. I'm going to go and select these. I'm going to click this little folder down here, or you can do Command G, and that will create a group. We'll just call this FS for frequency separation. And now we're going to move on. I'll show you kind of, I'm going to build a couple things here, and then we'll come back to them. But just the way I do it and the way the Photoshop action I'm going to give you does it, it kind of builds everything, and then we'll go ahead and touch on those later. But what we're going to do is we're going to create another layer, just a blank layer, and we'll call this eyes. And this is going to be overlay. So blending mode of overlay, and we'll make the opacity 50. And then we're going to make a couple new layers, and this one's going to be dodge. We will turn this to soft light, and then we'll copy this. So we'll copy the dodge layer, and we'll call this burn. And same thing, and then we'll go ahead and select dodge and burn, and we will make a group and call that, you guessed it, dodge and burn. All right. Final thing to set this whole process up is we're going to expand the frequency separation folder, and then I'm going to select the low layer, and I'm going to create a layer mask. I'll explain this a little bit later, but this is kind of part of the process I have when editing eyes. So we're going to make sure we select the low layer. So right now it was selected down here on the layer mask. Just click over to the right a little bit, and that'll select the layer itself. And now we're going to go ahead and start kind of smoothing out the skin. So they're kind of the concept of frequency separation is you're able to edit the low layer, which is kind of the tones and the color, separately from the high layer, which is the texture. So we're going to go through, and basically we're going to go and select the lasso tool, which is just L, and make sure you're on the lasso, not the polygonal lasso or the magnetic, just the normal lasso tool. And we're going to go ahead and kind of just in areas that are kind of higher contrast, or just a little like right here, I'll kind of start usually around the forehead. I'm going to push Q really quickly because that's going to show me what my mask is, and just to kind of see the feather of this lasso tool. Right now it's at 9.7. That's actually probably a good spot for this one. Again, it kind of depends on the quality of image you have and how many, the sensor size and all that stuff. So with this one, 9.7, because pixels are kind of universal, they'll be different based on the image you have. So I've got just a 9.7. I can probably bump it up to 10. So I'll push Q again. I'm going to deselect. I'm just going to select 10 up here in the pixels. And I'm just going to go around in kind of areas where the skin's a little bit uneven. This is why the Gaussian blur key command is really handy, because right now we're going to go through and we're going to blur a bunch of different times. And it just takes a long time to go up into filter, blur every single time. So creating that key command allows me to do it really quickly. I've also got this Wacom tablet. You can create a key command on this as well. I just find it easier to do it on the actual keyboard itself. So whatever you want your key command to be, I would recommend that. Mine is just Control-Option-Command-G. And that brings this up. So now we're going to bring the radius up. You don't want to go too high with this. I'll show you why in a second. And I'm actually going to deselect. I'm going to come up here where there's a really high area of contrast. So I'm selecting up in this area here. If I go here and I bring this radius way up, you can start to see basically what it's doing is it's pulling that many pixels on either side. So it's pulling from his dark hair or this background here and his lighter skin, and it's creating this really ugly shadow effect, which we don't want. So we'll go ahead and bring this way down. Probably to 8 or so is good. Depending on how smooth you want the skin, you basically just bring that number up. In this case, I still want him to have the texture and have a natural looking skin, so we're not going to bring the radius up too much on that. But we're just going to kind of go around and select this. You'll start to see it a little bit in this kind of area where we've got, so you can start to see that smooth out a little bit. If I take the preview off, if you look right in this area, you can start to see it just kind of smooths from the shadow to the highlight a little bit. to where you get kind of a smoother skin tone without affecting the actual texture of the skin. So we'll go through, we'll kind of just draw around. I'm going to do this pretty quick just so I don't take too long. We'll go under the eye so you can start to get rid of those bags a little bit. And again, with men, you want to leave some of these masculine features in. You don't want to get rid of them completely. But this concept is the same. The process is the same for men and for women. So we'll just go around and do this real quick. And that's probably good for that. So we've gone around, we've smoothed out all the skin across the board. Now we're going to go up and we're going to select the high layer. And we're going to go and push the J tool, which is the healing brush. So we want the healing brush, not the spot healing brush. One will have a little loop on it. We want the actual healing brush tool. So we'll go and select the healing brush. So this is a similar concept as the clone stamp tool, but basically what it's doing is we're sampling from just the high layer, so we're just sampling the skin texture and kind of cloning that. So we're going to go through and just kind of come around to areas that we need to fix. And I'm going through this. I'm going to try and go through this pretty quick. So there's a little eyebrow here. Let's get rid of that. And you just kind of go around the whole thing. Anywhere where you feel needs to be cloned, or you know, fixed a little bit, you just kind of go around and go to that. So we're just going to go around the whole face. Again, I don't want to do too much. I don't want to fix everything because I want him to look like him. This is a headshot after all, so I still want him to, you know, resemble himself. But we can go ahead and fix a little bit here. Just like these hairs here, we'll kind of get rid of some of these. And basically the trick with this is you want to sample close and something of similar texture. So if I sample, for instance, over here on his nose, so I push Option. So to sample, you push Option and you click down, and then you go here. It's not gonna match up exactly. So you want to make sure you sample something that's close and of a relatively similar texture, or else it's gonna look a little funky. So we'll go around here, get these on this side as well. And this whole process, it may seem like it's a little much for, you know, for a headshot edit, but really, like for me, part of my creative process is also the editing as well. I do try and get stuff done, you know, pretty well in camera, but, you know, part of the process is also the editing. So being able to edit this, and once you do it a little bit, you know, it goes a lot quicker. I can probably get, you know, a full retouch done in about 15 minutes now, where when I started it was, you know, 45 minutes to an hour. So don't let this fact that it might be taking a little while discourage you. It just takes a little practice to kind of get there and really, really get comfortable with everything. All right, so now we'll go, and I like to A/B from the original layer quite a bit, just so I can know that I'm getting what I need. So we'll hold Option or Alt and click the background layer, and that will A/B us between the what we've edited and the original layer we had, just so we can kind of see the progress that we've made. So that's looking pretty good right there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start editing the eyes. So we're going to go and up here where we created that layer that says eyes, we're going to go ahead and select that. And I'm going to push B for brush. And almost all the time when I'm editing, I'm having my opacity of my brush at 100, my flow at 5, and the hardness at 0. It's basically the difference between opacity and flow. Let me just show you real quick. We'll bring up this, just a blank layer. We'll go ahead and bring everything up to 100. I'm going to fill it with white or black. It doesn't really matter. I just want to show you the differences between flow and opacity on these brushes. So we've got a brush. Right now I've got flow at 100, opacity at 100. What that does is it creates just a normal streak. So if I turn the opacity down to, let's say, 5, what that's going to do is I can paint over this as many times as I want, and it will never get more than 5% dark on there. I can pick my pen up, so I've got my pen picked up, and I go down again. Now we're at 10%, pick it up again, so on and so forth. So as I keep going, it increases, but I have to pick my pen up every single time. So the difference between opacity and flow, so we're going to bring the opacity up to 100, the flow down to 5 now. What this does is this allows you to, as you keep going, it just gradually starts to increase, not the opacity, but as I kind of draw, it starts to fill it in, so I don't have to actually pick up my pen for that. So that's just the difference between opacity and flow. If you want to, get a darker thing and you have your opacity down, you have to pick your pen up or pick your finger up off your trackpad or your mouse, and then click again, draw again. With flow, you can kind of, it starts out, lighter, and then you can kind of draw it in. So I do everything with flow. So basically, let me delete this layer here. So we're going to go eyes again. So I've got my opacity at 100, my flow at 5, my hardness of my brush at all the way down to 0. And that just makes it a little more forgiving. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the white swatch. If you don't have the original swatches, the black and white, just click up here, or you can push D, and that creates the original swatch. And then to swap them, you either push this little bracket arrow, or you push X, and that gets us to white. So we want white, and what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and draw slightly over his eye, and that's just going to brighten it up just a tiny bit, not too much. With retouching, you really, really want to make sure everything's very subtle. You don't want to go too far in either direction with anything. So we just brighten that up a tiny bit. And this is where that layer mask on the low layer is going to come in. So with the high layer and the low layer combined, you're taking a blurred layer and you're taking a layer that is almost like overly sharpened and combining them. By adding this layer mask down on the low layer, what I'm able to do is I'm able to paint away. So I'm going to paint away on the eyes. Since it's a white mask, we want to make sure that our pen is black, or else it won't do anything. So we're just going to go ahead and draw a little bit, kind of circular motions right over the eye. If I hold Option and click on that mask, we can see that this is the mask right there. And what that's doing is it's creating, so if I take the low layer and disable it, it creates a really, really overly contrast sharp image. So all I did is I want that just to be in the eyes. And there's a million ways to sharpen eyes and edit this, but this is just the way I do it. So take that for what it is. But that's what I do. So I basically take the mask on the low layer and draw and kind of paint away that part. So that way I'm bringing back that sharpness from the high layer and the background layer combined. Maybe an unconventional way to do it, but it works for me. So, all right, so now we've done the eyes, we're gonna go ahead and turn on this dodge and burn layer. And what we want to do with dodging and burning. So basically the concept of dodging and burning is increasing highlights and increasing shadows. So it's making the highlights brighter, the shadows darker, within reason, of course. So what I want to do is I want to go over to these swatches. I'm going to take the white one, and rather than just painting in white, I want to sample from an actual skin color. So I'm going to go up here where it's brighter. So this right here is actually the skin tone from his forehead. And then I'm going to go and kind of go a little bit less saturated and a little bit brighter, so it's about halfway. And that's going to be the color that we're going to use for the dodging. So dodges, highlights, burnished, shadows. So we're going to go through, we're going to bring this up. Again, we've still got our brush at opacity of 100, our flow at 5, and our hardness at 0. And we're just going to go ahead and where there's highlights, we want to paint those in. And where there's shadows, we're going to leave those alone for now. But basically what you want to do is you want to accentuate that. So I'm just going to go here. The forehead is highlighted. We're going to go on the nose here. On the side of this nose here. So, shadow here. We've got highlight here. I'm going to go up into above his eye. And we're just going to go in, we're just going to paint that a little bit. We're going to go here where the kind of in between his beard there. And we'll go up on the ear just a little bit. So basically anywhere where there's highlights here, this is where you want to paint in. So we'll A-B that. All right, so we'll leave that alone for now. We're going to go ahead and select the burn layer. And we'll go ahead and click X, which gets us to the darker swatch. And for this, I like to sample from usually around the chin or the neck area. So we're going to sample in the dark area now, but again, we want it to be from the, from an actual skin tone. So we'll sample that. Again, same thing, we're going to go about halfway to completely desaturated and a little bit darker for this one. So the burn, we want a little bit darker. So we're going to select right about here. And that's going to be the kind of sample that we're gonna use. So with this, we're going to just kind of go up there. And again, we're just painting in the kind of darker areas. Definitely always do the eyebrows, just kind of bring those out a little bit. And with this, I will also go over, just very lightly, I'll go over his beard. And if I really wanted to get into it, I could also dodge and burn his coat or even this bottle here. So we've got that. Now I can toggle the full thing. We got dodge and burn. What that does is you're able to kind of shape their face and maybe even thin someone's face out or vice versa without using the liquify tool. So basically you're just kind of enhancing the shadows and the highlights there. So again, it's probably a good time for us to go ahead and A-B the whole thing. I think we're looking pretty good there. All right, so from here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a stamp visible layer. And what that means, it just takes all the layers that are visible and basically copies that into a layer up on top. So the reason I do this is how I kind of fix, hairs or, just little things like that. So you've got some of these gray strands in his beard. He's got this kind of flyaway up there. Rather than doing it on the, the skin tone layer, what I'm gonna do, I just create a whole nother layer and just kind of go from there. And if I would need to go back for anything, I can create a layer mask on that. If that doesn't make sense, that's totally okay. This is just the way I do it. It doesn't mean that it is truth or it is the absolute only way to do it, but this is how I do it and it works for me, so hopefully it might work for you. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hold Shift, Option, Command, E. If that doesn't work for you, you can go to Layer and Merge Visible, just hold Alt and then Merge Visible, and that just brings that up. So we're gonna delete that one because we don't need it. But this is where I go ahead and I can fix some of these flyaways here. So with this one, I can either choose to use the spot healing brush tool or the healing brush tool. The spot healing just kind of makes the decisions for you as to where to sample. So let's try that. Not great. So we'll go ahead and do healing brush. And you can kind of see it doesn't necessarily... I'm going to go A-B this again and see if how I like that. When I'm zoomed out, it's okay. But there's a little bit of, you can kind of see right here, there's a little bit of kind of just this, I guess I'll just call it like a smudge. I don't really know what it would be called, but we'll go ahead and back out of this. And this might be an example where I can actually use the clone stamp tool. So we'll try it on just normal. It's basically with clone stamp, I'll either use normal, I'll use lighter or lighten, or I'll use darkened based on the background. In this case, I'll either use normal, which is looking okay. I think this is the way to do it. And again, this is like such a minimal part of the image. It's not going to be noticeable if I don't get it perfect. And that's okay. And it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect every single time. Yeah, you wanted to get it pretty darn close, but some of us just don't have the patience for that. So we'll do that. I think that's looking okay. So now between that and that, I think that looks a lot better than just than having that little flyaway there. All right, so we can do the same thing with some of these. I don't want to get rid of all of these because I don't want it to just look like he's got a helmet on, but any that are kind of... So same thing as we did with the editing the skin. We want to sample from a similar area, because again, especially with a clone stamp, if I sample from the middle of its forehead and I want to go over here, that just copies it exactly. So you want to make sure you sample something very, very close. And I'm going to jump down here and do this beard here. With this one, it's a little bit, it's pretty forgiving with beard because the hairs are all crisscrossing and stuff. So what I'll do typically is I'll sample from I'll alternate sides. So right now I'm sampling from the left, and I'll sample from the right, and kind of like that. And when you zoom out, you can't tell at all. So that's just kind of a little rule that I'll do with the beards, is I'll just kind of sample, flip-flop each side. And you don't want to do I don't ever want to go like here and just do this, because that will just copy directly over straight down. So you want to have some variety and some, kind of scatter it. And we'll just kind of go through and do this beard here. We'll get this guy. And notice I'm doing very quick, almost jump cuts here. I'm not doing sample, drag a long line. I'm doing sample, quick, just because I feel like that's going to keep the most consistency there and really, really get. So notice I just did, I sampled from down here on accident for this piece. What I didn't want to do, so I want to sample up here, because otherwise it's going to look super weird. All right, and we've got a couple more here. And from here on out, we're going to go ahead and, I'm going to go ahead and save though. This is one thing to do. Always make sure you save frequently if you don't want to lose your work. So I'm just going to let this save for a second, and then we'll continue. I should have saved a lot earlier, but I didn't. So it's a pretty big file though, so it's going to go ahead and take a minute to save. So, all right, so we are all saved back into, so I just saved it straight back into Capture One. But now I feel comfortable to keep going, because the last thing I want is my computer to crash. So, all right. One thing I want to do is I want to take a look at these I don't want to call them bags under the eyes, but just kind of the dark circles under the eyes. So the way to get rid of those is, again, I always want to kind of sample from a skin tone. So the way I'm going to get rid of those is I'm going to create a curves layer. Also, I feel like I should have mentioned this earlier. If you don't have this workspace here, where you can see the adjustments layers and stuff like this, go up to Window, Workspace, make sure you have photography selected. There's different workspaces for whatever you're doing. In this case, photography makes sense, and that should bring this up. It might start with the libraries, which just has blank, so just make sure you have adjustments selected, and that should bring you to where you need to be. Again, I apologize for not bringing that up earlier. So now we've got that. We've got a curves layer. You want to make sure it will automatically default to having the layer mask selected. Just click over to the right again. Make sure that the layer itself is selected. And we're going to go up to, we've got these eyedroppers. So you want to go up to the very top one. We're going to double click. And we're going to select an area that is on the lighter side. So basically the area we want to get to. Right there, we'll go ahead and say OK. And then we want to sample from the area that we want to change. What that does is that brings the entire kind of image brighter, but we'll go back over to this layer mask, hit Command I, and that inverts the layer mask. And then we want to, again, with our brush at opacity 100, our flow at 5, our hardness at 0, we're just going to kind of paint. And also, I just started painting and nothing was happening. Make sure that if you're trying to paint on a black layer mask, make sure you don't have your black swatch. So we'll click X, so we have our white brush. And we'll just go ahead and kind of paint a little bit into here. And what this is doing is this is creating, rather than just bringing it out from nowhere, it's actually sampling from his skin tone. So it's going to look a little more natural. Yes, it might be a little bit much for this, but all we have to do with that is bring the opacity of this layer down. and then we can A-B that. And I can probably bring this down even more. What I do is I just didn't want it to be super, super dark, so it just kind of brings that up a little bit. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. So rather than just using that same layer, we'll do the same thing. So again, we'll double click this. We'll sample from the area we want to, change it to, and then sample the area that we're changing. So the reason I'm doing 2 separate curves layers for each side of the face is that the skin tone is going to be different based on where the light was. So if the light was way off to the side, the side of the face closer to the light is going to be a different color than the side that's in the shadows. So you just sample both, unless you're using completely flat light, it's going to be slightly different skin tones. So again, we'll just go ahead and paint that in, A-B it. We'll bring the opacity down a little bit. And that's pretty good. All right, really, I think the final thing for this shot is just to kind of get rid of some of the lint on this jacket. So we're going to go back to this layer that was the stamp visible layer. For this one, I am going to just use the spot healing brush tool because it's just going to be sampling from black. So I don't need to sit there and actually sample it every time. So we'll just go through. I'm going to speed you up through this because this might take a little while. So I will see you on the other side. All right, so I feel pretty good about all the, fixing all the lint on there, so it's not too bad. It's definitely better than it was, I think. Yeah, so there's a couple spots that's jumped out at me. So from here, we're going to go ahead and push save again. We're going to jump back into Capture One or Lightroom, whichever you use. I'm using Capture One, and we'll do a couple final tweaks for that. All right, so we're back in Capture One. I'm just going to kind of show you the process I do to kind of finish these images out. You can do these in Photoshop too. It's just I kind of like, and it works into my workflow, doing it through here. So what we're going to do is we are going to go over to the exposure panel, and I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to say new filled layer. And what that does is now we have a layer that's the mask is completely filled in. So if I want to do, this is going to be kind of for global adjustments. Let's say I wanted to bring the exposure up. It brings the exposure up for the whole thing. The reason I do it on a different layer is just so I have, again, the background layer to kind of go back and reference from. So what we're going to do is, I always kind of start with the levels. This image is a little bit, so you can kind of play with skin tone. You can play with a lot of stuff just based on levels and curves. They're going to do similar things, but they're always kind of in the RGB space. So you'll always have this RGB, which is kind of a full, you've got control of the whole thing. If I bring this up, it darkens it. If I bring it down, it lightens it. You've got the shadow area, which is darken the shadows. You're going to lighten the shadows, so on and so forth. And then we've got the red, green, and blue. So this image looks a little bit on the red side to me. And you can kind of look, there's a couple spikes of red in the histogram here. So again, I like to do this so subtly. I don't want it to go more, like it starts at 0. I want it to negative 0.2 or 3. And you can see that just kind of brings the red down just a tiny bit. You don't want it to be too much to where it's like, it turns the whole image cyan. So we're just going to go bring this a little bit. So basically, we've got the red, green, and blue. I did a recent video on kind of color theory using gels. The same concept applies here, where we've got red, green, and blue. The opposite, so if I'm bringing the red down, that's increasing cyan a little bit. If I bring the green down, that's increasing magenta. If I bring the blue down, that's increasing yellow, and so on and so forth. So right now, by kind of bringing the red, that's actually kind of subsequently increasing the cyan, or kind of that bluish green. So right there is pretty good. We can do the same thing with curves. So if I went in here with red and curves, I kind of take this middle layer here. That's going to do the same thing. Same concept. Bring it up. It's going to bring the reds. We're going to stick with the levels for now, though. So what I did is I kind of did a global red adjustment from the middle. I could, you know, if I'm thinking that the reds are too prevalent in the shadows, I can bring that down. That kind of just affects the shadows, and that same thing, it just affects the highlights. I kind of wanted to do just red overall, so I just did it from this middle slider here. From there, I do kind of want to look into his forehead. Looks a little bit overexposed. So I can either take this highlight dynamic range. In Lightroom, there should be a slider that's like highlights and shadows. I can bring that up. What that does is that tends to, in my opinion, make this look really gray and weird. So obviously that's not the route we're going to go. What I'll probably do is I will probably do a bring them down in the curves layers. But the trick with this too is I want to be able to just affect, so if I kind of slide these back and forth, what I want to do is I just want to have his forehead be in effect. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to push the D button for draw. That is not the original key command, but if you go up here, just click the brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select M to see where my mask is, and then I'm going to basically just draw in over his whole face here. And if I kind of go into spots where I shouldn't go, it's totally okay because I can use the eraser and kind of get rid of the mask there. So I clicked E to get the eraser up, so there was some that was kind of up in his hair. And I'm going to just deselect that over here as well. All right. You can be a little more diligent about where you select. I'm just trying to be slightly quick here. Okay, so I can do a couple things. There's a few things. There's the brightness slider. That's looking okay. But what I really want to do here is I'm going to go up into this color panel. I'm going to go color editor. And I'm going to go skin tone, and I'm going to select this little eyedropper here. And I'm going to select just kind of a neutral area, neutral skin tone. I'm going to just kind of go right in here on the cheek. And that's going to be a rough kind of dictation of his overall skin tone. What I can do now is I can adjust hue, saturation, and lightness in the amount, and then there's uniformity, and that's basically taking, so if I bring the lightness up, that's like what I did with the dodge and burn kind of gets mitigated there. So we're not going to mess with those too much, but we're going to just kind of show you what, if I bring the lightness down, that brings kind of the whole lightness across the board down. Saturation will just kind of desaturate it, which we don't want to do. Maybe a little bit, but not too much. And then hue just kind of changes the hue, so that's kind of making it a little more green. This is making it a little more red. I think with the overall adjustment, the hue is fine. But we're going to go ahead and maybe bring the saturation down a tiny bit and bring this lightness down as well. But now that we've got this layer, so we've got this layer that's just his face, we can go ahead and go back into this exposure panel and just do, you can just bring the highlights down again, but again, that kind of just, the contrast is kind of weird. So we're going to go and select the curves layer. And if I bring it over to the left, that increases it. Bring it down to the right, that kind of brings it down, kind of just what the highlight slider did. So we're going to go ahead and just click here in the middle. And we're just going to bring it down straight from here. I'm going to click down here. So the cool thing about histograms here is it's a very visual representation of the exposure in the image. So we've got here, I bring it, so basically it's in quadrants, so it's in darks, you know, it's highlight or shadows over to the left, highlights over to the right, and then it's amount. So it's kind of, if we did do the red channel, that's just all of the stuff that is in the red channel. And that's also represented in this histogram up here. But right now, I want to just kind of bring this highlight down a little bit. And you can kind of see, if I toggle this on, it's a pretty good, it's not too bad. It's definitely bringing that, like the hot spot on his forehead down. So for what we're doing, I think that looks pretty good. One thing I did notice is that he's got a little nick on his finger, and we've got these two little pieces on the bar that is a little bit distracting in my opinion. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna jump back into Photoshop. And the cool thing about this is I can create more edits in Photoshop and save it, and it will dump it back into Capture One, but it won't overwrite those edits I already made. So I can go ahead and we'll go back up to this stamped layer. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna use the patch tool for this. So I'm gonna start off with the lasso tool. I'm gonna lasso this. I'm gonna push J, and then the patch tool. And what that's doing is that kind of just, it's where you can select larger areas. It works pretty well. And then for this, since it's not a really, I would normally go back into the frequency separation layers, but since it's just kind of a minimal part of his hand, I'm just going to use this, I'm going to use the spot healing brush and just kind of paint over that. And that looks not good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the healing brush. Sometimes I'll try the spot healing brush. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you really want to kind of take control, though, just use the healing brush. That always works better. So I think that looks pretty good. We can go ahead and clean up some of these, some of the specks on the bar too. This is me just getting a little bit maybe too attention to detail, because no one's going to see this. So, all right, I think that's good. And so we'll go ahead and save, and that'll just dump it right back into Capture One. All right, so I was able to basically save the, I saved it into Photoshop, it dumped it back into Capture One, and it didn't overwrite any of the previous edits I made. So I've still got all my layers, I've still got everything. You can still see this here, but if I zoom in, it disappears. I don't really know why that is. Anyway, so basically the changes are made. From here, we can kind of go, this part of the bar might be a little bit, just a teeny bit distracting. Just this highlight here. It does kind of lead into his face, but I'm gonna darken that a little bit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create another layer. I'm gonna do the draw linear, the gradient, and I'm just gonna kind of draw up here, just a little bit. Again, we can push M, and it just kind of shows you where that's what part of the image is being affected. And then I'm going to go back into exposure. I'm probably just going to bring the brightness down a little bit, the contrast up a tiny bit, and we'll take the levels down. So that is just this. If that's too much, if I don't want that to be affected that much, again, I can just bring the opacity of these layers down a little bit. And I think as a whole, that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and hold Option and this little arrow here, and that shows the full, kind of the full edits there. I'm thinking that I want to bring the opacity of this, just the face layer down, just because I think it was a little bit too much and it was noticeable. So we'll bring that down to like 81. And finally, one step that I'll take is I will go into film grain and just add a little bit of grain back. You don't have to do this. I like it. So we'll go into silver rich. There's a few different grains, different sizes and granularities. So silver rich is pretty good. Do the granularity at 50%, and we'll just go up to like 25, 26. And what that does is it just kind of, if I bring this way up, you can kind of see, okay, there's a bunch of grain. we'll bring it back down to 50, and we just want a little bit. We don't want too much. We don't want it to look, you know, like there's high ISO or high noise. We just want to add a little bit of grain back. And that is pretty much it. So if you have questions or comments, go ahead and leave those below. And if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe. I am definitely bringing more of my long form videos from Instagram onto YouTube. So if you don't already subscribe, you should probably do that. And hit that thumbs up button if you found this helpful. And I'll see you next time.